Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we've got an incredible story for you. It's about a saint who, get this, owned absolutely nothing, couldn't even write his own name, but somehow became one of the most powerful spiritual figures of his era.
So that really is the question, isn't it? It's this incredible paradox that kind of flips everything we think we know about knowledge, about authority, completely on its head. And it's the key to understanding a life of just radical authenticity. I mean, just look at this comparison. The contrast is absolutely staggering. You've got the guru, a wandering ascetic, illiterate, owned literally nothing. And then his one and only disciple, who is this towering intellectual, one of the most famous scholars around. This relationship, just this one relationship, really makes you stop and rethink what it actually means to be a teacher. So, it's easy to hear about someone like this and think, oh, just some eccentric guy living out in the middle of nowhere. But no, that wasn't it at all. He was actually this pivotal spiritual authority, a super important link in a lineage that goes back for centuries. And his influence, through that one disciple, it is spread all over the world. Okay, so to really get who this man was, we have to dive into the one principle that defined his entire life, renunciation. And listen, when I say renunciation, I mean absolute renunciation. He took it to a level that is, well, it's almost impossible for us to even imagine today. You can really see his whole life as this journey of just shedding the material world layer by layer. He was born Vamsi Das, and he lived a pretty normal life as a householder for a while. But then his wife passed away, and at just 29 years old, he walked away from everything, his successful grain business, his family, all of it, to become a wandering ascetic. For 30 years, he lived in the holy town of Vrindavan before eventually settling in Navadvipa, just completely absorbed in his spiritual life. So this core idea has a name. It's called Vairāja. But for Gaura Kiśora, this wasn't some abstract philosophy you read about in a book. No, it was his lived reality, day in and day out. It meant he was actively tearing down any connection he had to comfort, to social status, even to things we'd consider basic, essential needs. And this is where things get really wild. He actively looked for conditions that would, push most people away. Someone offered him a nice little cottage to live in, and he flat out refused. Why? Because he knew people would show up asking for blessings, and it would just get in the way of his chanting. So for him, a cleaned-up outhouse was perfect. No one would bother him there. It was his sanctuary. And it was the same deal with his clothes. This just shows his complete and total indifference to what society thought was normal. He didn't see any need for new stuff. Instead, he would use what was literally thrown away by everyone else. This meant he didn't have to depend on anyone for anything. Even his diet was a spiritual practice. He had this deep conviction that indulging your sense of taste, what's called bhojana, would corrupt your devotion, or bhajana. So his incredibly simple meals, sometimes just parched rice or even mud from the Ganges, it was all part of that belief. It was about stripping life down to the absolute bare minimum. So what was he doing all day? This. 200,000. That's how many holy names he would chant every single day. That's like 128 rounds on a set of prayer beads. This wasn't just part of his life, it was his life. That practice was his wealth, it was his focus, it was his entire connection to the divine. Now, when you live a life of such radical honesty yourself, it kind of leads to something else. You develop zero patience for fakeness in other people. And he had this X-ray vision for hypocrisy. He could see right through anyone's act. Think about it. Because he had completely given up any desire for money or fame, he could spot it in others in a heartbeat. So you'd have these huge crowds watching some famous religious speaker, thinking, wow, what a holy man. But Gaura Kiśora, his vision cut right through the performance and saw what was really driving the guy. And his words were sharp. He saw this person and he said they weren't chanting for God, they were chanting for money. For him, using spirituality to make a profit wasn't just a mistake, it was like a poison. He felt it was actively harming the world by showing people this fake commercial version of faith, which in the end just gives genuine religion a bad name. And this attitude, it extended to the land itself. He was really bothered when he heard about someone trying to buy a piece of the holy land of Navadvipa. The whole idea that sacred ground, which for him was a living spiritual place, could be treated like any other piece of real estate. It just didn't compute. In this quote right here, it just nails his whole perspective. He's saying that all the jewels in the universe aren't enough to buy even a single speck of dust from this holy place. So trying to own it or sell it was just a complete misunderstanding of what it was. For him, the Holy Land, the Dhamma, wasn't something you could possess. It was a spiritual reality you had to serve. Okay, this next story is a perfect example of his totally uncompromising stance on wealth. A rich king, the Raja of Qasim Bazar, invites him to his palace for a big religious event. But Gaura Kiśora wasn't impressed by the Raja's status or his money. In fact, he saw it all as a huge danger. So he hits him with this counteroffer. He basically says, "You want to hang out with me? Great. Leave all your money behind and come live in a bamboo hut like mine." He explained that if he went to the palace, that wealth would eventually tempt him and they'd stop being friends and become enemies. His point was that real spiritual connection can only happen when you're on the same level, a level of simplicity, not luxury. So, this fierce, uncompromising integrity, it was about to be put to the ultimate test. And it happened right at the moment of his passing, in a really dramatic showdown that would basically seal his entire legacy.
This final scene is just incredible, because you see his disciple totally embodying everything his guru stood for. So after Gaura Kiśora passes away, a bunch of local priests show up and start arguing over who gets his body. They were all just hoping to build a tomb and make money off of it. But then his one disciple, Bhaktisiddhānta, shows up, and he issues this powerful challenge in a voice like thunder. He says only someone who has been perfectly pure for the last 3 days can even touch the body. And faced with this test of their own sincerity, they all just turned around and left. It proved beyond a doubt who the real spiritual heir was.
Wow, so after hearing about this incredible life, what's the big takeaway? What's the one thing we're supposed to get from all this? Well, if you strip away all the wild external stories, his entire philosophy really boils down to one single powerful idea.
And this is it. The divine name of Krishna is the one and only shelter. His whole life was a demonstration of this one idea, that sincere, constant chanting is the only thing that truly matters. Everything else, being a great scholar, performing fancy rituals, having a big reputation, all of that was secondary. For him, the pure sound of the holy name was everything. It held all the power. You know, in a world that's so often filled with spiritual performers and people putting on a show, Gaura Kiśora Dāsa Bābājī was the real deal. He was the embodiment of authenticity. He proved that true spiritual greatness isn't about how many books you've read or how much money you have or how many followers you have. It's found in pure, simple, uncompromising sincerity. His life was his message. And that kind of leaves us with a question for ourselves, doesn't it? In our world, which is so much about performance and social media and carefully crafted public images, his life really makes you wonder, what does true sincerity even look like today? And where do we even begin to find it?